Lesson 10.4 is all about Alberta and Saskatchewan joining Confederation. What were the reasons that they were joining, and what were some of the overall consequences of them joining Confederation? So stick around and let's learn something. Lesson 10.4, what factors led to the creation of the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan, the next two provinces to join into Confederation? We had our original four provinces, then came Manitoba, then came BC, and then in the last lesson we learned about Prince Edward Island joining Confederation. And now with Prince Edward Island having joined Confederation, we are truly seeing Canada being stretched from sea to shining sea. In the middle, though, between BC and Manitoba, we've got the Rocky Mountains, and then there's Manitoba, and then there's still some vastness of the Northwest Territories, and then we have Ontario. Now, those Northwest Territories, you can see here on the map, they are a part of Canada, but they are not actual provinces. They don't own their own land. The land is owned by the federal government, and the people there have less power to govern themselves because the federal government is going to control most of the things that are happening inside of the province, inside of the territory. And where did the Northwest Territories come from? Well, it came from the purchase of Rupert's Land in 1869. So 2 years after Canada becomes a province, they go out and they buy Rupert's Land. So Manitoba then becomes a province, not the same size that it is today, much smaller. But the rest of it then is renamed to the Northwest Territories. The territories do have a capital, and it is Regina. So Regina is the capital city, where a lieutenant governor is appointed, and there's a council that's appointed. Everybody that's there is appointed. It is a territory after all. But the problem is that the population, and this, I mean, it's not really a problem, but for a territory that is being controlled by the federal government, this could be seen as a problem. That's that the population is growing. So with a growing population, we need to appease the people, make them happy. We're going to give them elections. So we're going to have elections. And that is going to take place in 1888, where that appointed council gets replaced by an elected council. And in 1897, the Northwest Territories is granted full responsible government, which is going to be a really big deal. This is bringing more people into the Northwest Territories. So now the people that are living there, they're like, hey, wait a second. We want more say in what is happening in our day-to-day lives. We want provincial status. We need schools. We need roads. We need rail. And let's be honest, the federal government is not providing those things because schools, roads, things like that, that's not a federal power. That is a provincial power, which we learned in previous chapters. And the only way we're going to build these things and make these things and get these things is by taxing the population. If we're taxing the population, it needs to be a provincial government matter. So this is something that we are going to work towards. It's already a part of Canada, so it's not like we can use the help of the British, and it's not like we can then look towards the United States to become a part of them, because we are already a part of Canada. So we now have to figure out, how are we going to do this? So there's a couple of issues. Well, how many provinces are we going to create? Do we create like 4, 5, 2, 1? What do we do? And then what's the division of powers going to look like? Okay, and who's going to own what? Who's going to own the resources? Who's going to own the land? And what about the minority rights? Who is going to take care of that? So some really good conversations that are going to be happening over these next few years. And one of those people in those conversations is going to be this gentleman right here, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier. He wanted 2 provinces. He thought a single province would be way too powerful and would have too much say over what the federal government is doing. So it's better to split into 2 provinces. He wanted one province definitely to support minority education rights, and the other didn't matter to him too much, but he definitely wanted one of the provinces to support the minority rights for education. Those are going to be francophone rights. Okay, so in 1905, we have two acts passed, the Saskatchewan Act and the Alberta Act. Essentially, these created two new provinces. And now we need to take a look at who's going to control what. What are the federal powers going to have a say over, and what are the provincial powers going to have a say over? Well, and a lawyer by the name of Frederick Haultain argued that the provinces should own their own land and resources. Laurier, on the other hand, argued that Canada needed to own the land that was in these two provinces to help populate the West. If they want to get more people over, Canada needs to own that land so that they can help populate it with farmers. Federal government ends up keeping the land, and in return pays each province over $1 million. It's a lot of money back then. So they have this land agreement, and the land agreement stays in the hands of the federal government. So the land, as well as all of the resources on the land, stays in the hands of the federal government for 25 years. But we're going to come back to those minority rights. The first schools of the Northwest Territories, so before they became Alberta and Saskatchewan, were Catholic Francophone schools set up by the Roman Catholic Church. The first school actually in the Northwest Territories was in St. Albert, and it was built by Father Albert Lacombe, because the children of Fort Edmonton needed a place to go to school. So we can trace our first school back in the province of Edmonton to the school that was built in St. Albert. The school was run by the Grey Nuns. If you're familiar with Edmonton at all, we have a Grey Nuns hospital here. In 1875, so this was before the Alberta Act of 1905, in 1875, the Northwest Territories Act allowed Catholics to have a separate school board. And they had that because this was in line with the BNA Act of 1867, where we have the two schools protected by law. So the citizens of Edmonton, they create St. Joachim Roman Catholic School District. That is the first separate school district here in the province, and it was made in Edmonton. The newcomers, however, that were making their way out west as farmers, they wanted English schools. So in response to their demands, in 1892, the territorial government, because remember, it's not yet Alberta, it's the Northwest Territories, the territorial government changes the law to have only one school system. So what are the Francophones to do? Well, the BNA Act kind of allows them to have two school boards. So the Francophones turn to the federal government to help. And the Prime Minister believed that the provinces should have their own say. They should be independent. But he also believed that the Catholic minority should have a separate school system because that's in line with the BNA Act. So in 1905, when the Alberta Act was signed, it guaranteed separate schools, but there's going to be a thing here. The language of instruction is going to be English. So you can have your Catholic schools and you can have your non-Catholic schools, but all instruction is going to be in English, with French only a certain percentage of the day. Most were happy with this compromise, but others were not happy with this because they believed that a single Canadian identity was going to be developed based on English Canada. So they did not want that. So they continued to fight, and over time, more French was being introduced. So now, eventually, everybody will be happy. But we have a problem. Regina, obviously, is going to be the capital of Saskatchewan because it was already the capital of the Northwest Territories. But now this new province of Alberta is going to need a capital. So what are we going to do? Well, the two biggest cities at the time were Calgary and Edmonton. Both had a population of approximately 12,000 people, so a good population for back then. They both had railways. They both were important centers of business. So who are we going to choose? Well, the Prime Minister is going to choose. So Laurier, the prime minister at the time, he chooses Edmonton as the capital city to thank the Liberal voters who voted for him. Calgary, on the other hand, they supported Robert Borden, who was a conservative. So to kind of make the conservatives of Calgary upset, Laurier chooses Edmonton. So this is not the best news for Calgary, but Calgary is okay because then Calgary thinks that they are going to get the provincial university, because one major city typically becomes the capital and the second major city will then be granted the university. So they're okay. They're like, okay, no problem. We're going to get the university. However, the premier of Alberta, Rutherford, at the time, he chooses Strathcona to get the University of Alberta, further angering the Calgarians. And Strathcona is a town just south of Edmonton, across the river, that eventually becomes amalgamated into the city of Edmonton. And that's why today the city of Edmonton has both the capital city of the province and the provincial university. And that rivalry now is going to be much stronger, because now the people of Calgary are going to be very upset. And that rivalry still continues today, especially in sports and in business. What about our First Nations here in the province? Well, eventually, we can see here on the map, our First Nations sign numbered treaties with the federal government. And the First Nations move on to reserves, where a policy of assimilation starts to take place. First Nations and Métis are trying to be absorbed into a uniform Canadian society, and First Nations children are being forced to attend residential schools. The goal of the residential schools, you'll see in grade 9, is to have this assimilation take place. But the First Nation and the Métis of Alberta, they resisted the efforts of assimilation, and assimilation did not occur the way the government of Canada had intended for it to do. All right, head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.